All right, guys, we got another great episode of the NewOrleans.Football podcast for you. We are coming to you from the Better Call Botto podcast studio, and we are presented by Hardhide Ponchatoula Strawberry Whiskey. We're going to get into everything going on with the Saints through the first week of free agency, the moves we liked, the moves we didn't like, the things they need to still do, the things they didn't do, and what do we think of the CJ Gardner-Johnson signing? What it looks like in the future for the NFC South. We got a ton of great stuff for you guys. And if you aren't signed up to the site, make sure you check it out, NewOrleans.Football/subscribe. Extra members only podcast every single week. All of our news and analysis, our breakdowns, and everything else. And for our elite members, we sent out the RSVP save the date Sunday before the NFL draft. Make sure you respond to that this week because we are going to finalize our plans and send out the invitations to those. So if you haven't hit that, make sure you sign up. And if you still want to come, you want to come to that event, sign up for an elite membership, and we will get you on the list. So Hardhide Ponchatoula Strawberry Whiskey is an 86 proof blend of 3-year-old wheat bourbon, American light whiskey, and fresh Ponchatoula strawberries. Blended in New Orleans, it is not for the thin-skinned. Look for it in your favorite stores, bars, and restaurants. And if you need legal help with any of the following: car wrecks, offshore injuries, 18-wheeler collisions, Maritime Jones Act, hurricane and storm claims, you better call Botto at 504-323-7777 or 985-303-7777 for your free consultation and case review. And make sure you check out our friends at Firehouse Subs Veteran Boulevard location. Great people doing great things for the community. And if you are not on our YouTube page, NOF.TV, check out the Pels Pod. They got a lot of great content on there breaking down the Pelicans as they try to find their way into the playoffs. And if they don't, we got all the conversation on what they need to do next to reach their potential. All right, let's get into the show. Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back. Another episode of the NewOrleans.Football podcast. We are in the Better Call Botto podcast studio and presented by Hardhide Ponchatoula Strawberry Whiskey. As always, the first week of free agency in the books. Saints have done some things.
Are they free agency winners?
Well, that's the question. Are they free agency winners? Have the optics improved?
Yeah.
Just what is kind of the number one? You sit back, someone says, hey, evaluate their free agency. What's your answer?
Optics is the right word. I was just trying to think while we were sitting here. This is probably the highest their approval rating has been since like week 3. Don't you think?
Since week 3. I was going to say last year's approval rating after the Jarvis and Tyron moves was maybe
without
as high
question.
As it's
and
ever
then
been.
They win the first game against Atlanta. But I feel like it quickly snowballed from there, and people just been down on this team. They wanted them to fire everyone. I kind of sense a little bit of a turn in that. Not full optimism, but like some settling in, like, all right, I guess the Saints are trying to win the division, and I guess they kind of look like division favorites, and I guess the thing I like about it is they have something for everyone. Whatever kind of a critic you are of how they build their team and manage their cap, they did the big splash, we're going for it, we'll deal with the ramifications later move with Derek Carr. But then their week 2 of free agency was kind of what everyone wants. They caught up on the salary cap a little bit. They ate a little dead money instead of pushing it all back to next year in the David Onyemata and Marcus Davenport contracts. They traded in a couple of overpriced tackles for a couple of cheaper tackles. They went second, almost third wave of free agency with their signings. It was a very responsible week 2. So they had the big splash with Derek Carr and the very responsible week 2. No matter how you want them to approach free agency, there was something in it for you.
Yeah. Look, that's one of the main things that stood out to me is that they decided to take $17 million in dead money. If this was just the reckless, all in, all go for it, pedal to the metal approach, Onyemata and Davenport would still be here because it would have sort of been like the Mike Thomas deal. The Mike Thomas deal, if you're just kind of looking at it in the window of, okay, dead money this year's cap versus being able to maximize your talent, you end up costing them like $1 million more to keep than to get rid of. So they could have done something similar there, but then they're given terrible contracts. Like David Onyemata, he had 5 sacks last season. I do think people kind of forget that. He did kind of have like the re-ramp up sort of towards the end of the season. But overall, 30 $35 million for him.
More than that. It was 12 per year, wasn't it?
I think
36,
it was like a
something
3-year, $35 million deal. It's outrageous. You can't pay that for him. And then Davenport's deal, we finally got the details yesterday. It's more incentive laden than initially expected, but still, with how they operate their cap, I think that letting him go was the responsible choice. The all in, go for it, let's see what happens, who cares, worry about it later approach would have been to bring him back and see if you can catch that upswing on that deal. But trying to manage the cap a little bit, trying to get into a little bit more responsible plays, I like those moves. I think ultimately I would like to see their cap a little bit less insane. I don't want it to be, it's hard to decipher every single year. You would like to see a cleaner ledger, but at the same time, you want to see some aggression on top of it too. You just don't want to end up in a place like the Eagles where you do actually have $50 million in dead money at the end of the season.
I always compare the salary cap. I don't know if anyone else plays in any like fantasy football or fantasy baseball salary cap drafts, but you always build from the top down. Like if you have $200 to spend, you're like, well, I got to get my quarterback. Or you don't do that in fantasy football, but you know what I mean? That's what the team does. It's like, got to get my quarterback, got to keep my star players, and then we'll figure out what to do with the bottom half of the roster. Everyone's always worried that their salary cap means they can't afford a quarterback or they have to cut Cam Jordan and Ryan Ramczyk and Marshawn Lattimore. It doesn't mean that. You make your you get the players you have to have, and then you spend smartly on the second half of your roster. That's what they did this offseason. They did not let their salary cap situation stop them from addressing the screaming need, which is we can't compete without a better quarterback. And then they went and did some smart things with the cap. That's what I would want my team to do. Unless you were doing, like we've said a few times, unless you're doing the all-in full, we really mean it rebuild, like what Carolina's doing, trading up for the first pick or whatever. This is how I'd want to see them manage it. I don't want to see them go halfway. And I think, yeah, of course you would like to have better defensive linemen, and they need to have better defensive linemen by the end of the offseason. I think losing Kaden Elliss is probably the biggest disappointment of everything that's happened this offseason. You wish you could spend enough on a third linebacker to not lose somebody like Kaden Elliss. But I think they're legit contenders now, and probably the favorites to win the NFC South because of the big move they made. So it's really hard to complain with anything they've done.
Yeah, look, I'm just an alleged media member with the podcast, so I don't know, take this for what it's worth. But if I was criticizing the Saints salary cap and I wanted to say, okay, they got cap problems, here's the evidence, the Alvin restructure is the one that I point to. And that might have just been, look, they have $17 million in cap space right now, so they didn't even necessarily have to do that. Signing the draft class, I think, is going to cost them about $3.2 million against the cap.
They have.
So $14-ish million. That does feel like one they could have avoided. And then if he does face his suspension, when he's suspended, his base salary doesn't count against the salary cap for those games, the proration. So there would have been a savings there by not redoing that. But we have seen them in the past with value members of the team who do get into some trouble and they might be facing suspension. We've seen them get ahead of some of those deals and restructure those contracts to make sure those players still end up getting their money. So that might just be an employee satisfaction cost on top of it.
Yeah, the same thing they did. I always remember in week 17 of it, I think it was a year they missed the playoffs.
They did it with Lattimore too, when he was possibly going to be suspended.
I'm thinking of the Emmanuel Sanders season where did they miss the playoffs in Emmanuel Sanders this season? They're all blending together now. They made it. Yeah. But like in week 17, they kept feeding him so that he'd reach like his $1 million bonus. Like could have saved $1 million against the cap by not letting Emmanuel Sanders hit his incentive, but everybody was all in on employee satisfaction. Like you said, sometimes you do right by the player. Yeah,
but that's one I would have kind of been like, that was the one where it was like they probably shouldn't touch us if they can avoid touching it, and they ended up hitting it. So if you wanted to point it out, that was one. And that was before you got Pete to agree to a pay cut, you got Jameis to agree to a pay cut, Mike to agree to a pay cut. So they kind of did probably in that moment feel like, okay, we need to do this. And then they got extra breathing room by doing these other things. So there probably was a little bit of a backing into a corner on that one. And again, like if there's just one move where you're like, man, they really shouldn't have done this, that would have been the one for me.
Well, I'll say pay cuts then, because you bring up a really interesting point is we talk about restructures all the time, restructures. And restructures are not pay cuts. Restructures are actually players like it. They're like, for salary cap accounting purposes, we're going to give you all 18 weeks of your salary right now in a bonus check. And the player's like, cool, okay. You guys do you. That sounds great to me. But a pay cut is a much different thing. And this year they had 4 players take pay cuts. That would be the best way for every team to get out of the cap, but easier said than done. Actually, there was a leak that the Titans went to Kevin Byard about a pay cut, and he obviously was offended by it, not happy with it, let it be known through sources that he was going to refuse to take it. And that's probably going to poison the well a little bit with one of probably their 2 or 3, greatest players. So asking players to take pay cuts is tough business. You don't want to make a habit out of it. You don't want to be known as a franchise that by the time you get to the end of your deal, you're going to be approached about a pay cut. But that was the reality of the situation for Will Lutz, for Andrus Peat, for Jameis Winston, and for Michael Thomas this year. And getting all 4 of those guys to stay with the team at about half the amount of money they were previously going to make is huge for cap management. So it's not ideally the way you want to do it, but I think it's a good sign that all those players wanted to stay instead of we saw Jamaal Williams leave Detroit because he was so offended and probably come here for maybe even less than Detroit would have given him. Those players wanted to stay, realizing what their market value was.
I mean, there was a non-Detroit team that was offering him more money than the Saints too, and he decided to come here. The Mike deal is interesting because it is a pay cut, but if he plays, he's going to end up getting all his money back.
Right.
So it's not necessarily like a loss.
That wasn't like a slap in the face to him.
Yeah, no, it was like you gotta be healthy. Like, let's be realistic about this. But those will be unlikely to be earned bonuses. So if he does hit them, it'll count against the 2024 cap as opposed to the 2023. So that's a good deal for the team too. Again, I think with Mike, and we talked about this on the members only. Like, if you're talking about a difference of $1 million on a season, I think it's worth finding out because you have this cost here, and it's not ever that static to where it's a 1-year window. This is what this is going to cost. But I think when you get to the nitty gritty, it is a little bit, okay, how are we going to allocate these dollars? We need to add people. We need to get rid of people. Okay, Mike's going to cost this amount of money, $13 million. If we keep him, we can structure this to where it's $14 million. Let's find out. Like, I think that was smart for everybody. And I think from Mike's perspective too, he's in a place where he needs to show people, okay, look, all this stuff you guys are talking, it's not real. I can be healthy. I can play. The toe last year was bad luck. That had nothing to do with the ankle. Let me go out and prove it. I think it's smart for him to stay here and be in a situation where I know the offense. I know the language. I can hit the ground running. I'm comfortable. I'm going to show everybody. And then I'm going to go out and I'm going to get the $20 million a year contract for multiple years with a ton of guaranteed money. Makes a ton of sense for him to just say, all right, let's do this one more year and then see where it goes.
Yeah, I don't know what else was out there for Mike Thomas, but I think the Saints paid enough that I don't think he probably left a ton of money on the table. And yeah, I mean, the Chicago Bears are out there aggressively looking for receivers this year. Is that a good career move for Mike Thomas? Like, yeah. I mean, you have to go to a place with a good quarterback, and the Saints now have one. I think that's why he was so excited Derek Carr was coming here. And you have to go to a place where you think you're going to fit the offense. And, yeah, I mean, you don't want the whole first 3 months of your offseason to be about getting acclimated. Yeah, I absolutely agree that I didn't expect it to happen, but, now that it has happened, it all kind of makes sense that this was Mike Thomas's best chance at having that show you year. And there's no one in the league who's probably more eager to show you than Mike Thomas.
What didn't they get done that you think they should have gotten done?
Well, the defensive line sucks right now. I mean, let's be honest. I like that they, signed 2 defensive tackles, Colin Saunders and Nathan Shepard both have a chance to be better than David Onyemata and Shai Tuttle for less money. So that's great. But we went into this offseason, I listed that as the number 2 need for this team behind quarterback as an area where they had to get better. And they lost Marcus Davenport, David Onyemata, Shai Tuttle, and Kaden Elliss was a little bit a part of the pass rush. It would sometimes put him on the edge of the line. So it's screaming. And their best player on the defensive line, Cam Jordan, is 32 years old. So it is screaming. They need more pass rush from the 3 technique spot. They need more depth at defensive end. They need to get better. Obviously, it's a screaming draft need, and I think it's still a free agency need too.
Yeah, I think they need to figure some stuff out there. They need, if nothing else, more depth everywhere. Yeah. Everywhere could use more players, more talent, more pass rush. There isn't a great answer on the interior, and I still feel the same way about the edge guys as I did going into it. Nothing changed there. They're really high on Carl Granderson. I want to see more. I'm not going to blindly believe that. I think that you could
he can be part of my rotation. But
sure.
Yeah.
but like, is
It
your
doesn't
number
mean
two
I'm
guy
set as my number two guy.
And Peyton Turner, there's nothing to think there. Like, we just haven't seen enough. We've seen flashes. I like some of the stuff we've seen, but he's got to be a lot better there. The interior guys, I don't see a ton of pass rush potential there either. The one thing I will say is that Shepard has a 9.2 pressure rate on his pass rushes. David Onyemata was at 9.8 pressure rate on his pass rushes. I think that rate is usually indicative of kind of, how often you're on the quarterback, and then luck kind of comes into play on it. I think it's a better barometer than sacks overall to predict future production. The difference between those two guys is that Shepard played like 180-ish less snaps in the pass rush last year, 1.5 sacks versus 5. Maybe he's a guy that can get to 3.5, 4 under different circumstances being part of this. So maybe he can be a little bit of a part of that. But I want to look at that group and say, okay, here's where my interior pressure's coming. Okay, we're playing Tom Brady's gone, but he's a guy that's rattled by that. There's a lot of them in the league that just can't handle that interior pressure.
Derek Carr. It's a word on Derek Carr.
Yeah. All right. Here we're going to win some one-on-ones here, and this guy's going to impact 5-6 plays in this game, and hurry a couple throws, and maybe that's an interception somewhere. I think the lack of interception numbers last year was due to a lack of interior pass rush. You just don't force people into bad decisions.
They have to upgrade that.
Yeah, and that's how you get your gift picks. People will be like, oh, that guy's just standing there, he didn't do nothing. Well, it's a whole team effort, and when you are doing everything well, you do get those gift plays. They didn't get those gift plays last year because they weren't doing everything well. They were just bootstrapping their way to being a top 10 defense. But when you look at it optically, like, a lot of the symptoms that come with being a top 10 defense just weren't there last year.
The other negative is losing Kaden Elliss. Now, look, I don't want to overstate what Kaden Elliss is. He was here for 4 years and he had an incredible 10-week stretch. So, I mean, the jury is still out on if he can continue that. We saw Trey Hendrickson do it. We've seen a lot of guys do it. And I know they wanted to keep him. They believed what they saw last year.
He's a loss.
He's a loss. And the problem is, I think if we're looking back on this in a year or two and the Saints don't have success in the next year or two and they miss the playoffs one or two more times, and Kaden Elliss becomes something and Demario Davis retires, that's what people will look back on as, well, back when they had their cap troubles in 2023 and they let Kaden Elliss go. That has a chance to be the biggest sting of this offseason.
No doubt. And I think when you look back on that, maybe in years, and I think there's so much that goes into this, but if you want to look at it through like the Bill Belichick on sentimental spectrum of managing a team, you kept older players around and you got rid of the young up and comer. And it could be something where you look back on it in years. Now, I think practically speaking, when you're talking about a team that just kind of had a rough year, that leadership is still kind of solidifying on the coaching staff, getting rid of your cultural locker room leaders like Demario Davis, I think it goes beyond just on the field. I think he has a lot of value off the field. In this specific circumstance, I think it's even greater because you need those guys still in there to kind of help you establish, okay, this is what we're doing. This is the leadership of the team. This is, what the coaches think, and this is how we do things, and this is the way you're supposed to be. I think losing him would have been a big hit there, and it would have been a tough decision to let him go. And it's possible if you let him go and things go sideways, you look back and say, well, this bleeding of leadership, it just isn't there. And I haven't really seen the leaders. I think this is kind of one of the issues on the team right now, and I think it was an issue last year, is that the leadership, like post Breeze, post Teron Armstead, post, there just aren't a lot of guys. When you look on the defense, you say, oh, this is kind of like the next, okay, when DeMario goes and Cam goes, these are the guys. Like, who are those guys right now? I think that they're really young at a lot of spots, and I don't really see that kind of leadership. So you bring in Tyron, he's kind of a branch of that offensively. I don't really know who you would kind of call the leadership of the team right now. It'll probably be Derek Carr. I think he's going to step into that role. But like, as far as like incumbents, there aren't a lot of people out there. It's a lot of young people. Eric McCoy's probably one of those roles, but I think that's one of the issues with the team. So if you let DeMario go and you kind of, still, I think me personally, like, I was Kaden Ellis' biggest fan from day one. I hate losing him. I think it's a mistake, and I think it's going to continue to be a mistake going down the road. I see the reasons behind it. I would have found a way to shake some money loose so to keep him, and I would have given him a role.
I mean, yes and no on, like we talked about, showing cap restraint is a positive this year, but they had enough money for Kaden Elliss. I mean, they have it already. They wouldn't have even had to make a move to fit Kaden Elliss into the cap.
He wouldn't have taken that paycheck though with them keeping DeMario. He wants to play. He wouldn't have taken it. If the Saints are offering him 21,
Right.
Atlanta's
They're
offering
not
21.
offering him a starting full-time job.
He's leaving. They decided for him when they restructured DeMario's deal. That decision was done.
There's no opening for him.
If Kaden found a starting job somewhere, he was gone, and he did. And Atlanta was smart to pay him. That was a good move. I think they were. I don't understand the decision to pay Onyemata necessarily, a 30-year-old defensive tackle.
We were texting before, kind of predicting money. I thought Elliss would make more than Onyemata. That got flipped, but I guess Atlanta got both of them. So whatever, if you throw it all in.
But I mean, that might be kind of the same things we're talking. Nielsen wants to establish his culture on defense, and he gets a couple guys, and you got to pay him a little bit to do that. But I just where they're at, kind of in a rebuild, signing a 30-year-old defensive tackle was something that I didn't even have them on the list because I just never thought it made sense. But it does kind of when you, all right, like he's going to kind of be one of those guys that helps you set your program.
There's a bunch of positions on this team where I think and we'll probably feel different after are we into the fourth wave of free agency yet? The third wave of free agency in the draft?
Like it's done.
We'll feel a little differently about this, but they're paper thin in a lot of areas. They don't necessarily need to upgrade the offensive line if you're giving me all the guys you have now and they're playing, which how many years has it been since we've actually seen that? But Pete is still your left guard. James Hurst and Trevor Penning comes back from foot surgery. He's your left tackle. James Hurst is now ready to step in at any spot as your sixth guy.
Penning's still in the boot.
Yeah. I mean, Eric McCoy, Ryan Ramczyk, Cesar Ruiz also had surgery in the offseason. So it's like, it's a fine top six, but there's major injury concerns with 4 out of the 6. So that is going to depend on health. And then, I talked about how we ranked the offseason needs. Well, we should talk about running back in a minute because we haven't really talked about Jamaal Williams in this, but the contested pass catcher was also in the top 4. And Michael Thomas solves that need and bringing back Jawan Johnson, who could get better in that area. I'm fine with that if those guys are playing all the games, but if Michael Thomas isn't playing, then that is a gaping hole they haven't addressed.
Yes, they got to do something there. Now, I think just an heir apparent, just at that spot in general. I think it's something that would be smart to do. How do we feel about the CJ deal? CJ Gardner-Johnson finally signed a contract.
Well, there was definitely some misinterpretation of myself included, yourself included. We immediately pounced to what does this mean for the comp pick, but only because we've talked about all the other stuff.
Man,
we've talked about all the other stuff ad nauseum. In September, we said, or whenever it happened, August, it's terrible to lose this guy. September, it's terrible to lose this guy. When he was dominating with the Eagles, boy, there's a bad look for the Saints. They have like no interceptions. This guy already has 6. Yes, they missed him on the field last year, obviously. But now that we know what the comp pick is, it is worth noting that there were a lot of people saying even if he was going to hold out all year, the Saints were stupid. They should have held on to him, not played him just so they could get the comp pick. Well, they got more than the comp pick. So that part of the argument can be put to rest.
Yeah, the thing with the comp pick was did they get this guy that led the league in interceptions and upgrade their draft capital in this trade? The Eagles, if he left him free agency, got a big deal, they would have probably got a 3rd-round pick back for him. So they could have got this guy for an upgraded pick. Like you upgrade your pick and get the player. So if they had done that, the conversation would have been, well, should the Saints have just found a way to grin and bear it for a year, whatever was going on behind the scenes that led you to make this trade, and then gotten the 3rd-round pick themselves by just kind of being patient somehow, plus the production on the field, theoretically. Obviously, they ended up getting a better pick because CJ didn't get a better deal. That was the last piece of the thing. But some people were acting like they wanted us to use like that new Twitter feature where you can write a novel on top of the tweet and you need all the background. Like, I'm sorry, I thought that you were following along with the team. Like, this is universally accepted that they lost a good player last year, and he played very well for the Eagles.
We started this podcast by declaring winners. The Saints did not win the trade with the Eagles. The Eagles dominated that trade. CJ Gardner-Johnson is better than a 5th and a 6th. Case closed. That case was closed the day the trade happened. As we said when it happened, the Saints basically cut CJ Gardner-Johnson.
So I disagree with you a little bit there. I think the Eagles won their part of it. Yeah. And I think the Saints ultimately ended up getting okay on their part of it.
Okay value.
Because they were not keeping him on the team. That was it just wasn't working. Yeah. I'm not going to get into all the details because there's no need to talk bad about anybody after they've left or rehash old skeletons.
But they didn't
or
trade him. I guess what I'm saying is, if anybody was evaluating their trade thinking the Saints did it for the trade compensation value, they didn't do it for the. I actually have argued for the last 6 months they should have just cut C.J. Gardner-Johnson to stop everyone from thinking they like don't understand value or whatever. I mean, they were cutting him, and they got a little something back for him. And actually, exactly what they got back for him. I had this tweet prepared once I saw what he was going to get. I thought he was going to get the value of a 4th-round comp pick. That's kind of the deal I expected for him, that I think everyone expected for him. And they got exactly the value of a 4th-round comp pick. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think they thought, we're going to lose out on a comp pick if we trade him now. Let's get comp pick value for him. And that's what they got for him.
Yeah, I mean, look, the conversation here, again, we don't have to get all the way deep into it again. It's just, was there a way to save the situation without having to get rid of him? That's the conversation. But, it seems like
tough. I mean, you could argue that both ways. You should grin and bear it and keep a talented player on your team. At the same time as there is a line. And look, we don't know everything. We know some of the things. Some of the stuff was very public right in front of us on the practice field. I mean, if a guy decides, I'm so mad at you that you're not giving me the contract, I'm going to make life hell for you, I think everybody can understand there. I don't know if he reached the point that would cross everyone's threshold, but there is a point where you're like, we're just going to have to move on from this player. Like, it's not going to work out anymore. The Saints reached that point in their mind. It's unfortunate. It would have been a lot better if they could have hashed it out and got that player on the field. He's a good player.
The other part of it, too, is they put a for sale sign in his front yard, basically. That it was put out there that he was holding in. He wasn't practicing it, participating at practice. When that stuff comes out, that's a signal to the rest of the league. Hey, call and see. And this wasn't a fast process. Like, that for sale sign went up, and it was weeks. Like, he made it through the whole rest of camp. And there were moments in camp where he made some plays and stuff like that after that. So it wasn't a sudden decision. It was, okay, this guy's available, and the whole league was out there and they knew, and that was kind of what happened. And he hit free agency, and the contract was 1 year, $8 million, up to $8 million.
And look, I mean, obviously the contract makes it looks like people didn't want a part of him, but look who did sign him, Aaron Glenn, who used to coach him. So, I mean, we don't even have to litigate C.J. Gardner-Johnson. I just think the only thing about the comp pick value is it helps to show that the Saints aren't incompetent. Like, they got rid of C.J. Gardner-Johnson because that is a decision that they felt
they probably got lucky there, though. I mean, like, let's be real. Like, him not getting another contract, that is knowing the market and everything. But there's an element of luck that, like, a team didn't just say, like, all right,
it could have been a 3rd round. Yeah, it could have been a 3rd round. I always thought it was going to be a 4th round, though. Very few players get a 3rd round comp pick. I mean, 3rd round comp pick is almost like 15 to 20 million a year, like, kind of guys or whatever.
I think he wanted 12 at one point. So, I thought it was possible.
But 4th round comp pick is about what they got from him. But look, they lost. The Saints lost that they couldn't hang on to a player that talented. It's a shame when you can't reach a player and it turns that poisonous. I mean, there was a while we were wondering if it was going to go that way with Mike Thomas. They suspended him for a week a couple years ago. Like, that would have been a crying shame too if you lose a player and he wants to leave. Which, to bring this conversation full circle, is pretty remarkable that they've reached the point with their relationship with Mike Thomas that even when they had kind of nullified his old contract, he still chose to come back here and decided he wanted to be here, which is probably the biggest surprise of the whole offseason, but a good sign, where this team's at right now.
All right, so we got the owners meetings next week. Is there like a big, like, what are we waiting to hear from them type of thing at the owners meetings? I don't know if there really is this year. A little bit of D-line stuff, maybe kind of what went down with Mike. But I don't know if there's
Jameis. I mean, look, we haven't talked about did Jameis happen after we recorded last Monday? It was more of a Tuesday thing. Yeah. It feels like it's been 3 weeks.
Yeah, a lot happened last week. A lot happened. Free agency just opened the minute we posted the pod last week.
Yeah. Well, we were doing all our predictions.
We should have changed our schedule.
I tell you, like I said, I felt pretty good about our predictions. We went through every player who was scheduled to be a free agent and said, do we think they're going to stay or are we going to go? I think we got almost every one of them right, except for we were dead wrong about the quarterbacks. we're not dead wrong. I said I wouldn't bet $1 on it because they were still talking to Jameis at the time. But I thought Andy would be the one who'd stay and Jameis would be the one who'd go, kind of for the exact deals we saw. I thought Andy would stay for about $4 million as a backup, and Jameis might get the opportunity to be, the placeholder for a team that's about to draft a rookie, and that's what Andy got. But pretty shocking and remarkable that Jameis, and again, I think you have to consider it positive. I mean, everybody's talking about how bad the coaches did last year. They're worried about the culture, with Jameis Winston being example one of somebody that wasn't treated well enough last year. I thought he would be the first one running for a change of scenery. Pretty remarkable, and it says a lot about Jameis too. When he put out a statement, saying he wants to get as healthy as possible before he takes, gets his next shot. And being here in New Orleans means a lot to him. But pretty remarkable that he chose to stay for 1/3 of the price that he was scheduled to make, and deciding this is where he wanted to continue to get healthier. And
so does that mean he wasn't healthy enough to play last year?
He was never healthy enough to be at his best.
I still don't understand the frustration, I guess, if he wasn't healthy enough. I don't know.
I mean, here's my interpretation, and I talked to Winston at length one time while this was all going on, and then we all got multiple other chances to talk to him. You talked to him one-on-one. I think, I go back to Drew Brees. You remember the time Drew Brees had all his ribs broken, or the time Drew Brees had his ligaments torn in his thumb, and Drew Brees was all bent to prove Mike Trout came back in 5 weeks. I'm going to come back in 4 from this surgery. No one's ever come back that fast from this surgery. You're Drew Brees. As soon as the doctor says you're allowed to play, you're starting at quarterback. Even if you're 70%, 80% or whatever. I think Jameis wanted to be like, I'm the starting quarterback. If the doctors say I'm cleared to play, even if I'm fighting through it at 70%, 80%, I thought that was my job. I thought that's how it worked. I think that's where he was offended, but I don't think Jameis ever claimed I'm 100% healthy and they've benched me and I hate them for that. Even Jameis admitted I would not be 100% if I went back out there. I just thought I was going to get that. I thought that was my right as the starting quarterback, and that's what they told me when they told me to take a few weeks off and get healthier. So that's my interpretation. Yeah, I don't think he ever was 100% healthy.
I'd like to hear from him, sometime soon, even, because it just feels like there's a lot of confusion about kind of how last season ended and then how it ended up at this point. And it's going to be interesting to hear from him. I want to hear from DA too. Was there a conversation somewhere where, because it seemed like there was a misunderstanding on both sides, and it felt like there was frustration on both sides of this deal. And clearly, we all knew Jameis wasn't 100%. It's just these are the questions at this point. Just where was it at? How close were you to playing? Because he was frustrated last year. He was frustrated.
Yeah,
he was definitely frustrated. He wanted to play. He felt like he wasn't given the right messaging. So for this to end up back here was the biggest surprise of the whole offseason for me. It kind of makes sense to me from Jameis' perspective. If you look at it from, I thought no matter what, he was going to want to go out there and get a chance to start. But he shouldn't be in a situation like Andy. You go to Carolina and then week 4, you're benched for a rookie who's not as good as you probably at that point, but they want him to play. So now you're in a weird situation, or you're competing somewhere and you don't win the job, so they cut you. There probably weren't a lot of good options where he was going to have the Jimmy Garoppolo path in Las Vegas, where it's okay, you're the starter, you're going to go. Once they sign Jimmy, it's just sort of all right, well, where else does that position exist? So I think he's probably going to wait until he sees something where he can just take
there were
it and
a
go.
couple, I
even
guess,
Tampa, they probably want Trask to win,
Washington, Sam Howell
they want
Jacoby Brissett.
They want Sam Howell.
Taylor Heineke in Atlanta versus Desmond Ritter. There was no,
he wasn't going to get a fair fight.
There were no you're our guy.
There was no fair fights even for him. Everywhere he went, there was going to be a bias towards somebody else to win that. So
maybe Indy, where they're going to draft a quarterback who might not be ready right away in year 1, but still.
Same thing. What if he is ready in year 1? I just don't feel like there was a great situation for him out there where it's we want you. It's kind of you can come here maybe. It makes sense for him to maybe just wait a year and see what's out there. Maybe Derek Carr gets hurt and he gets a chance to play and he shows everyone what he's been dying to show everyone. So It makes sense. It was just surprising given
Yeah.
the interpretation of the situation.
But
the
yeah, I
fact
mean,
that
when we combine
he said in the
those,
statement he wants to be a starter. Like, I just didn't think he would come back here.
when we combine those two, Michael Thomas and Jameis Winston accepting less to come back to the Saints, at a time when that wouldn't have surprised us that much when the culture, everybody thought the culture around here and Sean Payton is, well, people just want to play for the Saints. Like, I mean, it speaks to something. I'm not going to scream, look, Dennis Allen flex, everybody. Like, he's doing such a great job. All his players want to stay and play for him, but they don't all want to run out the first chance they got.
Yeah. Look,
I mean,
the one thing I'll say about the optics of like them recruiting well, and I've said this a few times, and I was thinking about it the other day, it's just not as loud anymore. Anytime Sean talked to somebody, the whole world knew he was talking to him. So you knew every miss. They're probably missing at the same rate, maybe even a higher rate.
That's not true.
But you just don't know the
That's
pursuits.
not true. Dennis Allen takes a quarterback out to dinner, and I got Nick Underhill on Twitter saying they're at Ralph's on the Park, and here's the people who are eating.
Yeah,
there.
well,
We're still spying on that.
That was one. But Sean, like when Sean would pursue any, like he's after Clowney, he's after this guy, he's calling Josh Norman, Like these things are probably still happening, but it's just
it's true.
just
When
not loud.
Their misses, they keep their misses quiet.
Yeah.
We have not talked about running back, which was probably their most popular win. Actually, I joked on the members only. Like the most universally praised move was the pay reduction for Andrus Peat. Like, I think people really wanted to see that and not see them just take the cap hit. But as far as an addition,
Hold up. I see the motivation for Mike. I see the motivation for Jameis. I don't know why Pete took that deal. I don't get it. Maybe he just didn't want to leave. Maybe he just didn't want to leave.
What's the market for him at this point after the injuries he's had? So he took a 1 year, $5.5 million deal.
But he didn't have to.
Was there more than 1 year, $5.5 million waiting for him? The problem is, if you're a veteran, you are always perilously close to the, I have to sign the veteran minimum deal. Like it almost is like, you're $6 million, you're $7 million, you're $5 million. All right, now you're competing against the guys who have to sign the 1 year, $1.5 million deal. So 1 year, $5.5 million. That might be a safe bet for a guy who's dealt with his injuries.
held out if I was.
You think he gets more? Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. But anyway, the most universally,
He might have got more guaranteed money at least, like
it's all guaranteed. The whole thing's guaranteed.
Yeah, but I mean, like maybe a little over 2 years or something.
gotcha.
You know, he might not have had to come back on a 1 year deal as an injury prone player. Like he might have been able to secure a little bit more future money. Yeah.
He's got a family here now. He's been here a long time.
He has.
This is year
2015.
9.
Yeah,
year 9 for him. He's established a life here.
Yeah,
man.
it was 2015. I was surprised by that one. I was surprised he took that deal.
And I wonder if it's a competition between him and James Hurst for that job, to be honest with you. I don't know. Yeah.
I think Pete would be at.
I know, but Hurst is, we just tell James Hurst, thanks for being our most reliable starter over the last 2 years. You're a backup.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's possible.
And he has more value as a backup because he can go inside and outside.
He can go in at so many different places. But yeah, Jamaal Williams was the, when's the last time they signed a free agent that everyone was just like, well, that's perfect. Like, there's a whole kerfuffle going on with him saying he was insulted by Detroit. I've never had more Lions fans in my mentions than the last couple of years. They're like, yeah, well, you were a 1 year wonder anyway. We got David Montgomery. Get out of here. Like they're all pissed that he was offended by what they offered him. But I mean, the value is obviously, that's not going to break the bank for the Saints. It's nice to only pay $4 million per year for that position, and he seems like type A central casting, exactly the type of running back that they wanted to pair with Alvin Kamara. Now, obviously, they still need to draft one. They have two 28-year-old running backs now, and Alvin Kamara is probably going to miss some time for sure with a suspension. Either one of these guys could miss time with injury, so I think it's as big of a draft need as it ever was. But I mean, boy, that feels like a perfect fit.
Yeah. No, I like the signing. He does a lot of things well. I think he brings what they need. They were missing some of that hammer stuff down by the goal line, but I don't think he is a hammer. I think he just carries a hammer. Like, I wouldn't define him as a hammer. Like, he's got some finesse to his game too. He's got a little bit of elusiveness, not a ton, but he's not all power either, but he has like a nice combination of a lot of different things. And I think he can win a lot of different ways. He's good between between the tackles. He's good on zone runs. He's a good gap runner. I think he just kind of fits everything they do, and they should be able to plug and play him, and he should be pretty good. The one thing I'll say is I think he could probably do a little bit more in the passing game than he did last year for the Lions, and we saw it in previous years with him too. But you kind of get him out in space a little bit, and he's good in those areas. Like, you get him out there on those smaller guys, and he punishes them. And I think that he's going to be a good fit. I like the signing. I'm never a fan of giving money to running backs, but in their situation, I think you kind of had to. And I don't think
that's
the value
not too
was
much
bad
money
either.
for
No,
me. That's not too
it
much money
wasn't.
for
It wasn't.
me. Yeah,
it wasn't
I don't want to
value.
give somebody the Ezekiel Elliott deal. I don't want to ever be back
What did he
into
get
that
paid?
corner. Like, he wasn't he like? I mean, we're 16 million a year or something like that when he got his last. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but I mean that, like, and look, the Saints had that tough decision to make with Alvin Kamara, and I think they got just enough value out of that it ended up being closer to like 12.5 million a year. And he obviously does so much for this team. What would they be without him? What would their offense have been without him since they did it? But that is always. I mean, it's a short list of people who were very glad that they signed that running back to the second mega contract. It's really tough to do. This isn't a mega contract.
No, it's not. It's not. It's a decent value. Cooks got traded again.
He's going to end up back in New Orleans eventually once the cycle.
You think he's going to finish his career?
Every team,
Think he's going to finish his career? He has the most perplexing career of anybody I think I've ever seen. He's a consistently productive player that just constantly gets moved. Now, I get this one. Like, I think it just kind of ran its course in Houston, and
he won it out. Like, I mean, he won it out in a friendly way. Like. Not
it wasn't like the Saints.
Like, kind of like, if you guys are rebuilding and I'm a 30-year-old receiver, can you let me out? I mean, they let Mark Ingram go to the Saints for free that year, and that was the year I thought they were going to let him go too. But the rookie coming in though, and I mean, he's kind of was their veteran leader. It was slightly surprising. I think he has a lot of value to them with just kind of their situation. They'll probably, I don't know. What about that? What needs to happen at that position for the Saints? Because I don't think you get this guy is the go-to guy on third downs and in the red zone, and we trust him. I don't think you can find that in the draft. You can find a guy who can become that in the draft, but unless you find the next Mike Thomas, you're not finding that at pick 29 or 40 who's going to come in and have 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns as a rookie. Do you need to add somebody else like that in free agency? Like,
I think so.
What like who though? What is left to do? Like, where do you turn to get another go-to guy?
I think you need another receiving tight end. I think someone that can
Foster Moreau solving what we're talking about
a little. I mean, he can be part of it. I don't know if you go into free agency at this point.
I think they will probably sign Foster Moreau too. I mean, it makes sense in every way that something like that makes sense. So
I don't know that you go into free agency though and you find this is the one guy.
Yeah,
there isn't a one guy solution. If there was a one guy solution, he's going to cost $25 million. So
DeAndre Hopkins, I'll take him.
I think you kind of got to piece it together a little bit, maybe get a couple other pieces, try to elevate Jamaal Johnson in that role a little bit. If Mike stays healthy, you have the whole entire solution. But I think it's maybe add somebody else, draft somebody with those traits, and then you kind of got your piece together solution. But I don't think they were going to be able to go out there and get like, this is the contested catch guy. Those guys cost a lot of freaking money.
Yeah. I mean, it might be Foster Moreau and a slot receiver. It really might. I mean, it might not be the 6'4", I think they probably will add a slot receiver at some point. I mean, we keep talking about Hunter Renfrow being a good fit, even though I haven't seen him actually being available. I don't hate the idea of Jarvis Landry coming back. I don't know if you feel the same way about me there, but I feel like there's untapped potential there. But that type of receiver, Foster Moreau, I feel like that news drops at any moment. I don't know why, he doesn't get reunited with Derek Carr, and he is a guy who is probably more of a receiver than a blocker at the tight end position.
No disrespect to Jarvis. I just think at this point, if you bring him in, you bring him in and see if he can make the team.
Yeah, I got you.
He was good in week 1, and then it was
same
weird.
If they bring Marquez Callaway back. Yeah. I don't. But I mean, I don't know. If you get beyond DeAndre Hopkins, if you get beyond Adam Thielen just signed, like I don't know if there's this guy's our number 2. Like, I don't know if that is still out there. I really don't.
That Thielen signing feels like it was like directed squarely at the Saints. That's the one guy that Lattimore's just had trouble with his whole entire career. It's unbelievable. This is like the one player. Now he's in the division. You see him 2 times a year. He played well against Lattimore just even as recently as last year. So if you think he's like on a downward slope, and he probably is to some degree, but he's still good in that matchup. But that's going to be fascinating to watch this year. There hasn't been someone in the division that's given him issues.
He's going to get Lattimore too, because in Minnesota, it was every once in a while when the matchups got crossed with Justin Jefferson. Thielen is now number 1 in Carolina because they traded away DJ Moore.
Well, I think he had 9 catches on him in the last game. I might be mistaken on that.
London was Jefferson.
I think he had a handful of catches on him in that game. I don't know. I'd have to look it up. But yeah, no, it's going to be fascinating. And that's not even one of those ones where they like rarely, they've played 6 times, I think, Minnesota. It's not like they rarely cross paths.
Yeah.
Like it was almost like a division game throughout the career. So now twice a year, we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see what it does. Yeah, maybe it was more Jefferson in the last game.
Yeah, that was Lattimore's toughest.
Yeah.
Maybe the toughest matchup of his career.
Yeah.
And then it was frustrating that he couldn't get right back to it because he got hurt.
Yeah, that's right. He had the big play against him. Yeah. So, Carolina's going to be interesting this year. They're going to be, if the quarterback's any good, they're going to be interesting.
Yeah. The whole NFC South is doing the the rebuild thing that so many X amount of Saints fans would like to see the Saints do. So the Saints really need to flex on this division because if a rebuilding team leapfrogs past the Saints quickly, then it's all for naught.
They didn't really tear it all the way down, though.
Who's
either.
that?
Carolina.
No.
They traded their best player and kind of
Carolina
retained what they
did
had.
probably exactly what most I mean, I think if you asked fans of 8-8 teams or 7-9 teams or 7-10 teams, 8-9 teams, whatever it is now in the 17-game schedule, what you'd like them to do, I think you'd be like, trade away a couple assets, load up on draft picks, get the number 1 pick in the draft, and then spend a lot of money in free agency. I mean, Carolina's kind of doing, like a lot of fans want to see their teams do this, and then you have to explain to them, well, that's easier said than done. Carolina's doing it. So there's going to be reason to be jealous of them if it works.
I would hate to be sitting on the number 1 pick, though, and not have the quarterback. That's how you draft Trey Lance.
Yeah.
That's just kind of like, okay, we're going to trade up because we need a quarterback.
If you have the number 1 pick in this year's draft, I like the chances of you liking one of them.
Yeah, but I don't
love this year's draft class. There's 4 quarterbacks, and all 4 of them could bust. But I like the idea of I get my pick of the 4. Now, like the Indianapolis Colts, who are going to be like, we'll get the one that's left. That's really scary.
No, I don't think it's outlandish for them to like end up with a good quarterback. I just would hate to be the team that trades up to number 1 and you're like, man, I don't know which one we're going to take.
That's true.
When you make the trade, it's got to be, this is the guy. This is the guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe they feel that way though.
They don't.
Maybe that's why they went to number 1.
No, I know one of these teams they're actively trying to trade down with right now, like as we speak.
Yeah.
They're trying to trade down. So yeah, it's not. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is more kind of what like the owner's saying. I'm tired of going from who they have before Teddy, Cam Newton right before Teddy.
Yeah.
Or somebody in the interim between Cam Newton and Teddy, and then make the big move for Sam Darnold, then make the big move for Baker Mayfield. And he's like, that's it. Get me the number 1 pick in the draft. I don't care what it costs. Yeah. That's kind of what happened.
I'll tell you what, like we were talking about the lower tier quarterbacks, and then when I saw Baker get signed, I was like, man, I'm glad that's not the Saints. No offense to Baker either. All right, I think that's going to do it for us on this one. We appreciate you guys listening. Make sure you sign up to NewOrleans.Football. We'll be back end of the week next week, members only, probably Monday off because we got the owners meetings next week. So we will talk to the people that are signed up to the site end of the week on the members only.